The Denver morning was brittle and sharp, the kind of cold that sneaks into bones through the tiniest cracks in a jacket. Emily Carson tugged her scarf tighter around her neck and glanced at the window. Frost had etched jagged patterns on the glass, curling like fingers reaching out toward the sky. She wasn't afraid of flying, but she was terrified of remembering, of losing herself to old grief. Her fingers trembled as she smoothed the wrinkled photograph in her lap. It was a picture of Ben, her younger brother, standing proudly in front of his first Cessna, a toothy grin, aviator sunglasses tilted at a jaunty angle, his tiny pilot hat perched like a crown. The memory of him laughing, full of life and unbroken by the accident, hit her like a punch. She swallowed hard, trying not to let the tears spill. But they did anyway, and she quickly pressed a tissue to her face. The flight attendants moved down the aisle, their bright uniforms clashing with the dull gray of the cabin. Emily barely noticed them. She was too consumed by the fluttering panic in her chest, a panic she had learned to disguise with bravado and small talk in the years since Ben's death. People in her life had told her to get over it or move on. But no amount of platitude could erase the sound of the engines failing, the smell of smoke, or the haunting knowledge that she had been too late to save him. Her eyes drifted over the other passengers. Families, couples, business travelers scrolling on laptops, none of them knew what she carried. She envied them, even as she pitied herself. Her knuckles whitened as she clutched the photo. The plane's engines rumbled beneath her, a constant, steady vibration meant to reassure, but Emily felt only a mounting tension as the aircraft climbed. A child's laughter from a few rows back made her flinch. It was a small, innocent sound, sharp against the dull roar of her anxiety. She tried to focus on it, tried to pull herself back into the present. Maybe it was the child's laughter that gave her the courage, or perhaps it was just that the moment was quiet enough for her thoughts to get dangerous. The memory hit her suddenly, unbidden. The first day Ben had flown the Cessna solo, the nervous thrill in his eyes as he called her over the radio, "Emily. Watch this," and then the crash. Emily pressed her forehead against the seat in front of her, a deep, shuddering breath. It was an accident, she told herself. You weren't supposed to be the one to save him. But even as she thought it, her heart didn't believe it. The plane jolted slightly as it hit a pocket of turbulence. A few passengers murmured, a couple laughed nervously. Emily's hand flew to the armrest, gripping it so tightly that her fingernails dug crescents into the soft padding. She closed her eyes. The photograph slipped from her lap, fluttering to the floor. She bent quickly to pick it up, a small movement that felt monumental. A young flight attendant, noticing her distress, crouched beside her. "Are you okay, ma'am?" Emily tried to smile, but it faltered. I'm fine," she said, her voice cracking like old paint. She stuffed the photograph back into her coat pocket and pressed her hands together, as if clasping her own body could make it stop trembling. The attendant's expression softened. "Flying can be stressful," she said gently, "especially on mornings like this. Just take a deep breath. We're here if you need anything." Emily nodded but didn't speak. She wasn't sure what she needed, or if anything could fix this hollow ache gnawing at her. She pressed the tissue to her eyes again, wiping the tears she tried to hide from the stranger's kind gaze. The engine's roar changed slightly, a subtle shift that made her stomach lurch. She looked up at the ceiling, the tiny lights blinking in perfect rhythm, a mockery of control. Emily's chest tightened. A noise came from the cockpit, a chime she had heard countless times before on flights, and she froze. Normally, these chimes were nothing more than a signal, a door locked, a message received. But today, every sound seemed amplified, every vibration a warning. She tried to focus on the clouds outside the window. The sky was a swirl of muted grays, clouds curling in endless loops, stretching toward infinity. She imagined Ben's Cessna slicing through them, the engines thrumming, the sunlight glinting off the wings. That image made her heart ache. She wanted to cry again, but she also wanted to scream, to do something, anything, to shake herself out of the memories that had pinned her like a butterfly in a frame. Her thoughts were broken by a sudden, eerie silence from the cockpit. The background hum of the engines didn't change, but a lack of any other noise made the cabin feel unnaturally still. Emily tilted her head, straining to hear anything through the closed cockpit door. Then came the faintest strangled sound. Not a voice, not exactly, but a groan. A weak human groan that made her stomach drop. She wasn't the only one noticing. The flight attendants exchanged quick glances, their movements suddenly brisk, almost urgent. Emily's breath caught. Something wasn't right. Her pulse quickened. The chime echoed again, this time followed by a silence so profound it made her ears ring. The kind of silence that comes before disaster, the kind she remembered from the accident that had taken Ben. Her fingers dug into her knees. She could hear the faint clink of a cup sliding in the aisle. The cabin felt like it had tilted sideways, though she knew it hadn't. And then the first faint sound of panic erupted from the passengers behind her, a soft gasp, then another, then whispers turning into urgent murmurs. Emily didn't look back, didn't turn her head. She felt a cold certainty settle over her chest. Something had gone wrong, something terribly wrong. She noticed for the first time in hours that her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She pressed them together, willing herself to calm down. But her thoughts kept spiraling. It's just nerves. I've flown before. I'm fine. It's fine. Her voice whispered these words into her own ears, barely audible over the quiet murmurs of the cabin. The flight attendants moved toward the cockpit door with purposeful steps. Emily's stomach turned over as she watched them knock again, and then pause. The tension in the air was almost visible, a thick, suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. Then the door handle moved, slowly, hesitantly. The door swung open from the inside, just a crack. Emily's eyes widened as she saw the two pilots inside, slumped against the controls. Their bodies were rigid in unnatural positions, their heads lolling to the side. One of the attendants gasped, a soft sound that barely reached Emily but made her heart leap into her throat. The cabin went silent. Every eye turned toward the cockpit. Some passengers clutched each other, others whispered frantic prayers. Emily's heart pounded in a chaotic rhythm against her ribs. She felt frozen in place, yet a strange, fierce clarity pierced through her fear. She remembered every lesson Ben had taught her, the hours in the simulator, the feel of the yoke beneath her hands, the sensation of controlling the sky. Her breathing steadied slightly, though her palms were slick with sweat. Her eyes darted between the unconscious pilots and the growing panic around her. Something in her shifted. A small, trembling voice inside her whispered, "You know how, you can do this." Emily swallowed hard. Her body felt like lead, her legs unwilling to move. Yet somehow her mind was razor-sharp, focused on the impossible task before her. She clenched the photograph in her pocket, feeling the smooth edges of Ben's smiling face, and whispered, I can do this." The words were barely audible, but they carried a weight that surprised her, a weight she felt settle into her bones. She was still scared, terrified in fact, but beneath the fear was something more potent, a resolve forged in grief, in love, in memory. The plane rumbled under her, climbing steadily, unaware of the human drama unfolding within its cabin. Emily took another shuddering breath, her eyes fixed on the cockpit. The distance between herself and the controls felt like an eternity, yet she knew she had to reach it. And as she stood slowly, the first faint stirrings of motion began around her. The other passengers were moving too, some to brace themselves, some simply frozen in awe, sensing the gravity of what was about to unfold. Emily reached for the cockpit door handle, her fingers trembling as she gripped the cold metal. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Every eye was on her now. Every heartbeat echoed in her ears. She felt the legacy of her brother's teachings coursing through her veins. And then she opened the door. The cockpit smelled of metal, of faint oil, and of something acrid that made her stomach twist. Her gaze fell on the pilots again, and for a fleeting moment, panic threatened to swallow her. But she shut it out. She drew in a trembling, determined breath and stepped forward. This is it, she thought. I'm the only one who can save them. I can do this. And with that thought, Emily Carson crossed the threshold into the cockpit, leaving behind seat 9B and the tears that had kept her tethered to the past. The cockpit was colder than Emily expected. Not physically. It was the kind of cold that seeped into your bones, the emptiness of silence punctuated by the faint hum of the engines and the occasional warning light blinking like a heartbeat she couldn't control. The two pilots sat slumped over the controls. Captain Harlan's face was pale, almost waxen, his mouth slightly open as if mid-breath. The first officer, a younger man with sharp eyes now closed, had one hand dangling limply near the throttle. Emily's stomach twisted. Panic surged, but she forced herself to swallow it down, pressing her palms to the edges of the yoke. "What do I do first?" she whispered, more to herself than anyone else. The cockpit instruments glared back at her, a cacophony of red and amber lights screaming warnings she had only seen in training videos. Altitude, engine performance, cabin pressure, 100 tiny boxes of chaos, each one a potential death sentence. Emily pressed a trembling hand to the captain's shoulder, shaking him gently. "Sir, can you hear me?" No response. The first officer twitched slightly, then nothing. Her heart hammered so hard she thought it would burst through her chest. She glanced back at the cabin. Flight attendants had gathered near the door, whispering urgently to each other. Passengers were now staring, some wide-eyed in terror, others frozen mid-breath, as if even moving might make the plane fall faster from the sky. "Emily, step back," one attendant called. But Emily didn't step back. She took a breath and reminded herself of every moment she had spent in a cockpit with Ben, the feel of the yoke, the subtle push and pull of the throttle, the way the controls responded to her hands. She had flown before. Not like this, not in a 737, not with 180 lives depending on her, but she had flown. She could do this. She had to. Her hand hovered over the radio, hesitating. The words that had haunted every nightmare since Ben's death bubbled in her throat. "I don't know what I'm doing," but she forced them out anyway. "Mayday, mayday, mayday," she whispered, pressing the transmit button. Her voice shook, cracking mid-sentence. "This is Flight 2274. Both pilots are unconscious. I need assistance. I am not a certified pilot." Static hissed back at her, making her teeth chatter. And then finally, a voice cut through the white noise, calm but sharp. "Flight 2274, this is Denver approach. Copy your mayday. State your experience level." Emily froze, feeling the weight of hundreds of eyes in the cabin on her. She gripped the yoke as if it were the only lifeline between her and oblivion. "I've flown a small plane before," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But not a commercial airliner." "Understood," the controller said evenly. "We'll talk you through every step. Can you reach the autopilot panel?" Emily's pulse spiked. Autopilot. Her hands shook violently, but she nodded even though the controller couldn't see her. She turned to the complex panel of buttons, switches, and screens, her fingers hovering. Each light seemed alive, each dial a tiny monster waiting to betray her. A sudden jolt of turbulence sent her body lurching forward. The controls vibrated beneath her hands, and a bead of sweat slid down her temple. She gritted her teeth and pressed her palm firmly against the yoke, fighting the urge to panic. "Stay calm, Emily," she whispered. "You can do this, you have to." A flash of lightning lit the cockpit, momentarily illuminating the frozen faces of the pilots. Emily's breath caught. The storm outside had already been brewing, but now it was crashing against the fuselage with a terrifying intensity. Rain lashed the windshield, and the plane shuddered as though the clouds themselves were trying to tear it apart. The controller's voice came back. "Emily, switch to autopilot now. Flip the panel's first switch, yes, the one labeled AP Engage." Her fingers trembled as she reached for it, imagining Ben's hands guiding hers. She pressed the switch. The autopilot engaged. A small green light blinked reassuringly. The plane steadied slightly. Emily exhaled, feeling a surge of relief, and then immediate terror. You've stabilized, but altitude is dropping. Engine 1 is fine, Engine 2 shows decreased performance. You must prepare for a possible emergency landing. Her stomach dropped. Emergency landing. The words ricocheted through her mind. She thought of her brother, of every story of a pilot struggling to save a plane, of every nightmare she had suffered alone. I can't fail. I won't fail. A flight attendant leaned through the cockpit doorway, eyes wide with disbelief. You're doing this. Emily's voice was barely audible. I have to. The attendant stepped back, shaking her head. God help us all. Emily adjusted the yoke slightly, feeling the plane respond with a sluggish groan. The wind outside had intensified. Clouds rolled like molten steel across the sky, and the airplane rocked violently. Lightning illuminated the interior of the cockpit, showing her sweat-streaked face and the crumpled pilots beside her. Emily, the controller said, calm and commanding, listen to me carefully. You must maintain heading 270. Pull up gently to 30,000 feet. I'll guide you from here. Emily nodded, her teeth clenched so tightly her jaw ached. She had no other choice. The yoke moved under her fingers, responding to the smallest adjustments. She remembered Ben's advice. The plane will obey steady hands. It doesn't care if you're scared. Another turbulence jolt hit. The plane rocked hard, sending her body into the seat. She gritted her teeth and pulled back on the yoke, feeling the aircraft resist, groan, and finally obey. She pressed the radio again. Controller, I think I've got it, she stammered. Good, keep steady. Now check your instruments. Your left engine is stable. Right engine may require throttling down. Can you do that? Emily's hands flew over the throttle. She adjusted carefully, remembering every lesson from hours spent in the simulator with Ben's sweat poured down her temples. Her stomach twisted as the cabin behind her shook, the passengers clinging to seats and each other. A loud ping startled her, a warning light flashing red, cabin pressure dropping. Emily's heart raced. Emily, the controller said, slowly adjust your pitch to compensate. You're doing well, just focus. She nodded, biting her lip so hard it bled. Her mind raced. Every thought, every training memory, every instinct she had ever learned about flying surged through her. The autopilot hummed beneath her hands, but she refused to rely on it completely. She had to feel the plane. She had to be in control. Another flash of lightning struck, closer this time, illuminating the terror on the passengers' faces as they peeked into the cockpit. Emily felt a cold fire ignite inside her. This was no longer about fear. This was about life, hundreds of lives, including her own, all teetering on the edge. She adjusted the yoke again, feeling the plane level slightly. The turbulence rocked the aircraft but did not throw it off course. A small part of her dared to hope. But then came a new sound, a deep thrum, irregular, alarming. The right engine coughed twice, then sputtered. Emily froze. Her fingers lingered over the controls, as if touching them might break something essential. Her pulse raced. She could hear the faintest whisper of wind through the fuselage, growing louder with each passing second. The controller's voice came again, urgent but calm. Emily, engine 2 is failing. You need to prepare for single-engine flight. You can do this, just stay calm, we'll guide you. Her stomach lurched. Panic clawed at her throat, but she forced it down. She pressed her hands firmly to the yoke. I can do this, she whispered. I will do this. The cockpit seemed to hold its breath along with her. Outside, the storm raged, the clouds illuminated by a jagged ballet of lightning. Inside, Emily felt the impossible weight of hundreds of lives pressing on her shoulders. And then the plane jolted again, sharply, more violently than before, and the cabin erupted into screams behind her. Emily gritted her teeth and braced herself. She could do this. She had to do this. And as she leaned forward, gripping the yoke with every ounce of strength, she realized this was no longer a test. This was survival. The plane groaned beneath her. The storm screamed around her. And Emily Carson, shaking, terrified, and untrained for this moment, prepared to take full control. The cockpit was silent, except for the roar of engines and her own pounding heart. Emily's fingers tightened around the yoke, knuckles blanching as she felt the plane groan beneath her. Each jolt from the storm felt like a hammer striking her chest. She wasn't just controlling metal and fuel. She was holding the lives of 180 strangers, the unconscious pilots, and herself. Every instinct, every lesson Ben had drilled into her, screamed at her to stay calm. But calm felt impossible. The cabin behind her had erupted into chaos. Passengers were screaming, crying, clutching children or phones, or staring blankly at the ceiling as if the act of moving might make the plane drop faster. Overhead bins rattled. One opened slightly, dumping a bag onto the aisle with a loud thunk. The smell of fear was thick, sweat, perfume, and the faint metallic tang of adrenaline mixing into a pungent cocktail. A flight attendant ran down the aisle trying to calm passengers. "Everyone, please, stay in your seats, brace positions, seat belts." But her voice barely rose above the panic. A man behind Emily yanked his laptop from the tray table, holding it in front of him like a shield. Another passenger sobbed openly, clutching a child to her chest. Emily's stomach churned. She could hear her own heartbeat in her ears, loud enough that she could almost count the beats. She forced herself to focus on the yoke, the dials, the blinking warnings. One step at a time, one control at a time. You know how to do this. Lightning cracked outside, illuminating the interior of the cockpit in stark white light. In that flash, she saw the pilots again. Captain Harlan's head lolled dangerously toward the throttle, his hand brushing the wrong lever. Emily froze for a split second, then leaned over to gently push it back into its neutral position. It was a small action, but it grounded her, reminded her she could intervene. She took a shaky breath and addressed the controller. I think I've got some control. The autopilot is stable, but the right engine, it's sputtering. I don't know if it can hold." "Understood," the controller replied. "You are doing well. Stay with me. We're going to guide you through this. First, you need to stabilize your altitude and heading. Can you maintain 30,000 feet and heading 270? Emily's mind raced. 30,000 feet, heading 270. One hand on the yoke, one hand on the throttle, engine dying, cabin panicking, storm outside, hundreds of lives. She could almost feel Ben's voice in her head, sharp and steady. "Keep your eyes on the horizon. The plane will follow your hands." She adjusted the yoke carefully, countering the violent tilt as turbulence struck. The autopilot hummed, but she resisted relying on it entirely. This was her hands, her decision-making, her survival. The cabin lurched again, hard, knocking a passenger's coffee tray to the floor. A wave of screams hit her from behind. Emily bit back her own scream, focusing on the dials. The plane wobbled slightly, then steadied. She adjusted the throttle for the right engine, which coughed and sputtered but didn't die completely. A small flicker of hope, yet the storm was far from over. Rain pelted the windshield, the wipers barely keeping pace. Lightning struck the clouds around them, revealing the jagged tops of storm cells like mountains in the sky. Then came the seatbelt sign ding. It flickered ominously. The passengers knew the turbulence was severe, but Emily didn't have time to reassure them. She had to keep the plane level. One wrong move, one panic jerk, and the plane could spiral. A flight attendant poked her head into the cockpit doorway, her expression desperate. "Ma'am, can you do this? You're—" Emily cut her off, voice trembling but firm. "I have to. No one else can right now. You need to help the passengers brace. Follow the instructions exactly." The attendant nodded, fear and awe battling in her eyes, and ran back into the cabin. Emily focused on the yoke again. The controller's voice cut through her fear. "Emily, you need to prepare for descent. I know it's sudden, but we need to line up for an emergency landing. Your plane is heavy, storm is severe, and your fuel is limited." Her stomach lurched. Descent, landing, 2 words that carried the weight of the impossible. She glanced at the pilots. Captain Harlan twitched, groaned faintly, but was still unconscious. The first officer had begun to slump further, dangerously close to the throttle quadrant. Emily swallowed hard and whispered, "Ben, guide me." Her hands flew over the instruments. She adjusted the heading, eased the throttle for engine 1, kept the right engine at the maximum safe output. The autopilot assisted, but she refused to rely on it completely. She had to feel the plane, anticipate it, coax it, like Ben had shown her on long summer afternoons in the Cessna. Another wave of turbulence hit, violent enough that she thought the plane might tilt sideways entirely. She gritted her teeth, leaning into the yoke, forcing the plane to respond. Her arms burned with strain. Sweat ran down her back. Yet even in that moment, a strange clarity emerged. She could do this. Behind her, the cabin's panic intensified. A child screamed, a woman clutched a prayer book to her chest, and some passengers began whispering farewells into their phones. Emily tried not to hear them, tried not to let the fear seep into her bones. Then came a new sound, a soft ping, high-pitched, almost metallic, cabin pressure dropping. Oxygen masks began to deploy. Emily's stomach turned over. She glanced at the ceiling of the cockpit, watching the masks bounce lightly. No time for panic. She pressed herself closer to the yoke, adjusting the pitch slightly to maintain altitude. The engines roared, the plane shuddered, and she could feel it responding to her movements. One step at a time, one control at a time. Lightning cracked again, and in that flash, Emily saw a passenger in the first row peek into the cockpit, eyes wide with terror and awe. Their hand flew to their mouth. Emily offered a faint nod, almost imperceptible, acknowledging their fear, but her mind was elsewhere, on the instruments, the yoke, the wind, the storm, the controls. "Emily," the controller said, voice calm and precise, "prepare for a shallow descent. Keep your speed steady. Your left engine is stable. Right engine still sputtering, but hold your adjustments. Can you do that?" "Yes," Emily whispered, forcing her voice into steadiness. I can do this." Another turbulence wave struck, sharper this time. The plane tilted violently. Emily's stomach dropped, her hands shook, but she held the yoke firm, countering the tilt. She could feel the passengers behind her bracing, the plane groaning under the strain. Her focus sharpened, all fear replaced by raw, honed concentration. She adjusted the throttle again, coaxing the right engine to maintain minimal output. It coughed, stuttered, but stayed alive. Another flash of lightning illuminated the instruments, the blinking lights like warning signs on a battlefield. Emily ignored the red alerts. She could handle this. And then suddenly, the storm outside seemed to intensify, the plane rocking violently. One passenger screamed, gripping their armrest so hard it cracked. The overhead bins rattled. The oxygen masks swung wildly, casting eerie shadows across the cabin. Emily's pulse raced. She felt every heartbeat in her chest, every second stretching into eternity. The controls were her only anchor. The autopilot hummed, obedient, but she refused to relax. She had to fly. Her thoughts drifted briefly to Ben. If he were here, he'd say, "Steady hands, steady mind." The plane follows your hands. She gritted her teeth and repeated the mantra in her mind. The plane responded, inching back toward stability. But then a new, terrifying realization hit her. The autopilot wasn't enough. Engine 2 was failing faster than she expected. If she didn't act, the plane would begin an uncontrolled descent. Hundreds of lives teetered on the edge. Emily's hands flew over the controls. She adjusted throttle, rudder, and pitch simultaneously, her mind moving faster than her body. She could hear the screams behind her, the alarms, the storm, but she blocked them out. She had one objective: survive. A sudden jolt threw her against the yoke. She pressed her body into it, groaning as the plane resisted, then settled again. The controller's voice returned. "Emily, we're almost through the worst. Prepare to descend gradually. You're doing incredible. Keep calm." Emily nodded, teeth clenched, almost through the worst. She didn't dare hope, but for the first time she felt a flicker of confidence. She had control, partial, shaky, but control nonetheless. And as the plane continued its turbulent flight, Emily Carson realized. She had stepped into seat 9B terrified, and now she was the only thing standing between hundreds of people and disaster. The storm raged, the passengers screamed, the engine sputtered. But Emily gritted her teeth and whispered, "I can do this." The plane lurched violently again, but she held the yoke firm. And in that moment she knew the real test was about to begin. The descent, the landing, and the choice between fear and courage. Emily's hands hovered over the yoke, trembling but determined. Her heart pounded like a jackhammer in her chest. The cockpit was alive with alarms, blinking lights, and the low hum of the engine struggling to stabilize. Outside, lightning fractured the clouds into jagged mirrors of white and silver, illuminating the violent storm that seemed intent on swallowing them whole. She inhaled sharply, gripping the controls. Every passenger, every crew member, every unconscious pilot depended on her. The weight was suffocating, but it forced clarity into her mind. One control at a time, one step at a time. Her first move was simple: stabilize the plane. She leaned forward, feeling the resistance in the yoke beneath her fingers, coaxing the nose upward just enough to maintain level flight. The plane groaned, responding sluggishly, but it obeyed. Her hands shook, but she forced them steady. "Emily, you're stable for now. Good. Now monitor your engine levels. Engine 2 is sputtering more aggressively. You may need to reduce load on engine 1, the controller said, calm and precise. Emily nodded, though the controller couldn't see her. Her mind raced through every lesson Ben had taught her about throttle adjustments, balancing lift, and anticipating turbulence. She adjusted the throttles carefully, coaxing engine 1 to maintain its output while easing engine 2 back to its minimum safe level. Sparks of hope flickered in her chest. Then the plane lurched violently. Rain hammered against the windshield and she fought to keep the yoke steady. Her body rocked with the plane, arms burning with exertion. She pressed her forehead against the instrument panel for a moment, taking a deep, shuddering breath. "You can do this, Emily. You have to do this." Behind her, the cabin was chaos incarnate. Passengers screamed, sobbed, and prayed. Children clutched their parents' arms. Flight attendants shouted instructions, bracing themselves as the aircraft shook under the storm's relentless assault. Emily couldn't look back. Every second she did could mean disaster. Lightning cracked, illuminating the interior of the cockpit. The green autopilot light blinked reassuringly, but Emily refused to rely solely on it. This was her plane now. Every decision, every movement, every ounce of willpower mattered. "Emily," the controller said, voice calm and steady despite the emergency, "prepare for descent. You're going to need to line up with the nearest airport. You can do this. I'll guide you." Descent. The word hit her like a physical blow. She swallowed hard, heart racing. Lining up with the runway, adjusting for storm winds, maintaining one failing engine. It was impossible. But there was no choice. She inhaled deeply, gripping the yoke tighter, and leaned into the task. She adjusted the plane's pitch slightly, feeling it respond under her hands. The nose dipped gradually, the aircraft obeying her gentle commands. Her eyes flicked to the throttle controls. Engine 2 coughed violently, a rough stutter that made her stomach drop. She eased it back further, coaxing the engine to remain functional. Sparks of panic threatened to rise, but she pushed them down, forcing her mind to sharpen like a blade. The storm outside raged with renewed fury. Wind slammed the fuselage from the side, jarring the plane violently. Rain lashed the cockpit windows, blurring the horizon. Emily fought the controls with every ounce of strength she had, countering the tilt, adjusting the yaw, coaxing the plane to obey her hands. She remembered Ben's voice, sharp and insistent. "Feel the plane. It will respond if your hands are steady." Her hands burned from the strain, her arms trembling, but she refused to let go. She adjusted the yoke slightly, coaxing the plane into a smoother angle. Slowly, painfully, it began to level. A small, fleeting relief flared inside her, but she didn't allow herself to breathe. Not yet. "Emily, you're doing incredible," the controller said. "Now adjust heading 280, align with runway lights. Maintain altitude but begin shallow descent." Emily nodded, teeth clenched. She tilted the plane gently, keeping it level with the horizon she could barely see through the storm. Her eyes flicked to the instruments, then back to the opaque gray sky. "Runway. Focus on the runway. You can do this." Suddenly, the plane jolted again, sharper than before. The right engine sputtered violently, coughing fire and smoke. The autopilot warned of imbalance. Emily's stomach lurched. Her hands flew to the throttle, adjusting Engine 2's output minutely, coaxing it back from the brink. "Steady, steady, steady," she muttered under her breath. Her body ached, her palms burned, but she held firm. A flight attendant poked her head into the cockpit doorway, eyes wide with fear. "Ma'am, you're really doing this?" Emily nodded, her voice barely audible. "I have to." Behind her, the cabin groaned with turbulence. Passengers clung to armrests, whispered frantic prayers, or stared blankly at the ceiling as though mere observation might prevent disaster. Emily blocked it out. She had no time for fear. Her focus was total, all-consuming, a laser beam cutting through the storm. Another lightning strike illuminated the cockpit. Emily froze for a split second, then refocused on the yoke. She could do this. She had to. The controller's voice cut through the chaos again. "Emily, shallow descent now. Line up with runway lights. Adjust speed. Reduce altitude carefully. You're almost through the worst of the storm." Emily obeyed. She gently adjusted pitch, eased back on the throttle for Engine 1, coaxed Engine 2 to maintain minimal output. The plane trembled under her hands, but it obeyed. Slowly, excruciatingly slowly, she felt it responding. Her eyes scanned the horizon. Through a break in the clouds, faint orange runway lights glimmered like a promise. Her heart leapt, but panic flared again. She couldn't misjudge. Not now, not ever. "Emily, prepare for final descent," the controller instructed. "Stay calm. Follow my instructions exactly. You can do this." Her hands flew over the controls, adjusting, coaxing, guiding. Another turbulence wave hit. The plane tilted violently. Oxygen masks swung overhead. The cabin lurched. A child screamed. But Emily pressed on, her teeth clenched, body trembling, refusing to release the yoke. Her mind replayed every lesson Ben had taught her. Steady hands, steady mind. The plane follows your hands. She forced herself to obey, forcing the aircraft to respond. Slowly, the plane leveled, stabilized. Her pulse roared in her ears. Then came another sharp jolt, a warning light on Engine 2. Smoke, fire, she didn't know. She only knew she couldn't panic. Her fingers adjusted the throttle minutely. The engine stabilized barely. Emily exhaled through gritted teeth. "Okay, okay," she whispered. "I can do this. I will do this." She scanned the horizon again. The faint orange runway lights had grown brighter. The storm had not abated, but a corridor of visibility had opened, a narrow path through the clouds, a lifeline. The controller's voice was calm but firm. "Final approach, Emily. You are lined up. Altitude decreasing. Reduce speed gradually. Hold the yoke steady. You can do this." Emily's arms burned, her muscles trembling. Sweat streamed down her face, soaking her hair. Her mind narrowed to the controls, the runway lights, the plane, the storm. One step at a time. One control at a time. And in that moment, Emily realized something extraordinary. Despite her terror, despite the chaos, despite the odds, she was flying, truly flying. Not a simulator, not a memory. She was saving lives. The plane trembled violently again, but she held the yoke firm. The runway grew brighter in the distance, a fragile beacon cutting through the gray tempest. Emily gritted her teeth and whispered, barely audible, "I can do this." Her voice carried conviction now, a mantra, a promise. And the storm, for all its fury, seemed to respect her resolve. Emily's hands ached. Her arms burned from the constant adjustments, her knuckles raw from gripping the yoke like a lifeline. Sweat poured down her face, dripping into her eyes and blurring the instruments. She blinked rapidly, forcing herself to focus. Outside, the storm had intensified. The clouds were dark, jagged walls stretching as far as she could see. Lightning tore the sky apart with every flash, illuminating the violent turbulence that threatened to rip the plane from her grasp. The controller's voice cut through the chaos, calm yet firm. "Emily, you're approaching the storm cells. Keep heading 280, altitude stable, reduce speed gradually. You'll need to navigate carefully to align with the emergency runway. Can you manage this?" Emily's stomach twisted. Manage? She had to manage. Every life on this plane depended on her, and there was no one else to act. She nodded, even though the controller couldn't see her. Her voice was barely audible. I'll do it." The plane jolted violently, thrown by a sudden downdraft that made the passengers scream. A wave of adrenaline surged through Emily's veins. She adjusted the yoke slightly, coaxing the nose upward. Sparks of hope flared when the plane stabilized, if only for a heartbeat. Behind her, the cabin had become chaos incarnate. Flight attendants were shouting instructions, trying to brace terrified passengers. Children screamed, bobbies cried, phones recorded every second of the unfolding nightmare. Emily didn't dare look back. She didn't have the luxury of fear, not yet. "Emily, maintain heading. Storm cells ahead. Adjust your descent carefully. You can do this," the controller instructed. Her hands flew over the controls, adjusting throttle and yoke in precise, small movements. She could feel the plane responding, almost like a living thing, groaning and resisting, yet yielding to her guidance. Every flash of lightning illuminated the instruments and the unconscious pilots, reminding her that she alone held the fate of everyone on board in her hands. Another violent jolt struck. Oxygen masks swung wildly above the passengers. The plane tilted sharply. Emily pressed herself into the yoke, countering the tilt with all her strength. Her teeth clenched. "Steady hands, steady mind. The plane obeys your hands." She repeated it like a mantra, drawing on every lesson Ben had ever taught her. A warning light flashed. Engine 2 was failing faster than she had anticipated. Smoke drifted faintly from the instrument panel. Emily's stomach dropped. If the engine failed completely, she'd lose all stability. She forced her trembling hands to adjust the throttle again, coaxing Engine 2 to maintain the minimum output. Sparks of hope flickered. The engine coughed, sputtered, but stayed alive, barely. The wind slammed into the fuselage from the side, causing a violent tilt. Emily leaned into it, countering the plane's lurch with precise, measured movements. Sweat stung her eyes. Her breath came in short, shallow gasps. Her arms burned, but she held firm. "I can do this. I must do this." "Emily, prepare for descent. I need you to reduce altitude gradually while maintaining alignment with the runway lights. Watch your speed and engine output," the controller instructed. Emily nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She adjusted the plane's pitch carefully, allowing it to descend slowly. The runway lights glimmered faintly through the storm, like fragile stars in a stormy night sky. Hope surged, but the storm wasn't finished yet. Rain lashed the windshield, turning visibility into a blur of gray. Lightning struck close enough to make the cockpit flicker with eerie white light. Emily's hands flew over the instruments, keeping the plane steady. Her focus narrowed to a razor edge. Just her, the yoke, the plane, the storm. A turbulence wave hit, violently pitching the plane downward. Emily fought it with every ounce of strength. She felt her arms trembling, her muscles screaming, but she held the yoke firm. The plane groaned, obeying her, inch by painstaking inch. The controller's voice cut through again. "Emily, I need you to prepare for a slight bank. The runway is offset. You need to angle the plane slightly to the right while maintaining your descent." Her stomach lurched at the thought. She adjusted the yoke, leaning carefully into the turn. The plane tilted, the controls resisting her but gradually obeying. Sweat poured down her face. Her vision blurred, yet she kept the runway lights in her sights. "You can do this. You must do this." Suddenly, the right engine coughed violently, threatening to fail completely. Panic clawed at the edges of her mind, but she forced it down. Her hands flew to the throttle, coaxing the engine back to life. Smoke trailed faintly from the panel. Another jolt threw her body forward, and she gritted her teeth, holding firm. Lightning cracked, illuminating the cabin. The passengers behind her were screaming, crying, gripping armrests, and whispering frantic prayers. Emily forced herself to block it out. She had no time to listen. She had to fly. The plane trembled again, violently, but Emily pressed on, adjusting the yoke and throttle with precise movements. She could feel the aircraft responding, inch by inch, to her commands. Her arms burned, her body ached, but she refused to let go. Another flash of lightning revealed a new terror. The storm clouds were denser, the turbulence stronger. She had to navigate carefully to avoid vertical gusts that could rip the plane from her control. She adjusted the yoke, leaning into the wind, coaxing the plane into a smoother descent. The runway lights flickered faintly in the distance. "Emily, you're doing incredible," the controller said. "We're lining you up for the emergency landing. Reduce speed slightly, maintain heading, and prepare for final descent. You can do this." Her hands flew over the controls, making minute adjustments to pitch, roll, and throttle. Every movement was critical. The plane groaned in protest, but it obeyed her. Slowly, the runway lights grew brighter, closer, a fragile lifeline cutting through the gray storm. Her mind flashed to Ben's voice: "Steady hands, steady mind. The plane obeys your hands." She repeated it silently, drawing courage from every memory, every lesson. She had survived worse than fear. She could survive this. Another jolt rocked the aircraft, violently tilting it sideways. Passengers screamed. Oxygen masks swung overhead. Emily leaned into the controls, countering the tilt with precise adjustments. The storm roared around her, but she held firm. The right engine coughed again, threatening failure. She pressed the throttle, coaxing it back to life. Sparks of hope flickered. The plane trembled but obeyed her. The runway lights were now clearly visible through the rain, glowing like orange flames in the gray abyss. Emily's heart pounded. She had almost made it, but the storm was relentless. Gusts slammed the plane, threatening to throw it off course. "Emily," the controller instructed, "final approach, keep steady, you're almost there. Follow my instructions exactly." Emily nodded, teeth clenched, arms trembling. Every muscle burned, every breath came in ragged gasps, but she held the yoke firm. "I can do this. I will do this." The plane shuddered violently again, but Emily pressed on, coaxing it into alignment with the runway. The storm screamed around her. The cabin erupted behind her, but her focus was absolute. And in that moment, Emily realized something extraordinary. She had stepped into seat 9B terrified, and now she was the only thing standing between hundreds of people and disaster. The storm had not yet passed. The plane continued to groan, the engine struggled, the passengers prayed and cried. But Emily Carson, terrified, exhausted, and untrained, held the yoke firmly, determined to see this flight through. Emily's hands ached, her arms trembling from hours of fighting the controls. Sweat poured down her face, dripping into her eyes. The plane shuddered violently in the storm, its metal groaning in protest. Engine 2 had finally failed completely, leaving her with only one struggling engine, and the autopilot as a faint, fragile backup. Her chest tightened. One engine, one chance. Every life on board, every passenger, every crew member, even the unconscious pilots, depended entirely on her. Her pulse thundered in her ears, drowning out everything but the roaring wind outside and the distant alarms. The controller's voice cut through, calm but urgent. "Emily, you've lost the right engine. Maintain heading with the left engine. Reduce speed to minimum safe. Prepare for single-engine approach. You can do this. Focus. Emily gritted her teeth. Okay, I can do this, she whispered, though her voice shook. Her hands tightened on the yoke, knuckles white. She could feel the plane tilting toward the dead engine side. She leaned into the controls, compensating, coaxing the aircraft back to level. The storm outside raged with renewed fury. Wind slammed the fuselage from the right, pitching the plane violently. Rain lashed the windshield, reducing visibility to near zero. Lightning flashed, illuminating the cockpit in harsh white light. Emily blinked through the glare, keeping her eyes locked on the instruments and the faint glow of the runway lights she could just make out ahead. She adjusted throttle and rudder carefully, coaxing the plane to hold altitude. Each micro-movement was critical. One mistake could send them spiraling out of control. Her arms burned, but she refused to let go. The cabin erupted behind her. Passengers screamed, held onto armrests, clutched each other tightly. Oxygen masks swung wildly overhead. Children wailed. Flight attendants shouted instructions, but their voices were swallowed by the storm. Emily couldn't afford distraction. She couldn't afford fear. Steady hands, steady mind. The plane obeys your hands. She repeated the mantra silently, drawing courage from the memory of Ben and every lesson he had taught her about flying. Another violent jolt shook the aircraft. The left engine roared, struggling to compensate for the missing thrust of Engine 2. Emily pressed firmly against the yoke, leaning into the tilt, coaxing the plane back to level. Her arms screamed with exhaustion, but she ignored it. Survival required every ounce of her. Emily, you're approaching the final descent. Keep heading aligned with the runway. Adjust your pitch carefully. Reduce speed gradually. You can do this, the controller instructed. Her fingers flew over the throttle, carefully managing the struggling left engine. Sweat stung her eyes, but she forced herself to focus. The runway lights grew brighter, but the plane pitched violently with each gust of wind. One wrong movement could mean disaster. Emily swallowed hard. I can do this, she whispered again, though she felt the fear clawing at the edges of her mind. I have to, I must. A violent downdraft slammed into the plane from above, pitching it downward sharply. The cabin screamed. Emily's stomach dropped as the aircraft groaned. She leaned into the controls, adjusting pitch and rudder, struggling to stabilize the plane. Lightning flashed, illuminating the chaos in the cockpit and the twisted bodies of passengers bracing for impact. The plane responded, slowly, inch by inch, to her commands. A small, fleeting relief surged through her, but there was no time to dwell on it. She had to focus on the runway ahead, the one fragile strip of hope in the stormy gray abyss. Another jolt threw her forward. Her forehead hit the yoke for a split second, stinging sharply. She pressed on, forcing the plane to level. Her pulse roared, her vision blurred with sweat, but she refused to let go. I am in control. I must be in control. Emily, you're almost aligned. Reduce altitude gradually. Keep heading steady. Watch your speed. One engine only. You can do this, the controller instructed. Her hands shook violently as she adjusted the yoke, coaxing the plane downward. The left engine strained, roaring under the pressure. Every micro-movement counted. Too steep and they'd crash. Too shallow and they'd overshoot the runway. The storm outside raged, testing her, but she refused to falter. The cabin lurched violently again. Passengers screamed. Oxygen masks swung. Children cried. Flight attendants shouted for calm, their voices barely audible above the storm. Emily focused on the yoke, the instruments, and the faint glow of the runway lights ahead. Just one step at a time. One control at a time. Another lightning strike illuminated the cockpit. Emily's eyes widened as she saw the pilot's head slumped, reminders of the stakes. She pressed the throttle for the left engine, coaxing it to hold, and adjusted the yoke to maintain level flight. Sweat poured down her face. Her arms ached. Her vision blurred, but she held firm. The runway lights grew brighter. She could see the faint outline of the tarmac through the rain. Hope surged, but fear clawed at her again. The storm had not yet released them. Wind slammed the plane from the side, pitching it violently. She pressed forward, countering the tilt, coaxing the aircraft into alignment. "Emily, you're lined up. Final approach. Keep steady. Maintain altitude as much as possible. One engine only. You can do this," the controller instructed. Her pulse thundered in her ears. Her hands flew over the yoke, adjusting, coaxing, guiding the plane. Every ounce of strength, every second of focus, every memory of Ben guided her. She had almost made it. But then a sudden gust slammed into the plane, violently pitching it sideways. Oxygen masks swung. The aircraft shuddered. Her stomach dropped. Sweat poured into her eyes. Her arms trembled, burning from exertion. Emily's teeth clenched. She leaned into the yoke, countering the tilt, coaxing the plane to respond. Inch by inch it leveled. She could see the runway clearer now, glowing faintly through the storm. One chance. One engine. One chance to save them all. Her hands flew over the throttle and yoke, coaxing the aircraft into perfect alignment. She could feel the plane responding, the metal groaning, the left engine roaring under pressure. Behind her, the cabin screamed, cried, prayed. She ignored it, focused, controlled. "I am the plane now. I am control." Another violent gust slammed the plane, pitching it sharply. Emily gritted her teeth and leaned into the controls, adjusting rudder and pitch. The aircraft shuddered but responded. She adjusted throttle, coaxed the engine, leveled the plane. The runway lights were now fully visible. She could see the wet tarmac, glistening like glass in the rain. Relief surged, but terror followed immediately. One miscalculation could send them into disaster. "Emily, maintain heading. Keep altitude, reduce speed carefully. You're almost there," the controller instructed. Her hands shook violently, sweat stinging her eyes, arms burning, body trembling, but she pressed on. She could see the runway now, almost within reach. The plane responded to her adjustments, inching closer. The storm raged around them, but Emily Carson, terrified, exhausted, and untrained, held the yoke firmly, coaxing the aircraft, guiding it inch by inch toward safety. And for the first time, a fragile thought whispered in her mind, "I might actually make it." But the storm was far from over. The plane trembled violently, the engine strained, the cabin screamed, and Emily Carson, hands gripping the yoke, heart pounding and mind razor-sharp, prepared for the final, impossible descent. The runway lights glimmered faintly through the storm, a fragile beacon against the gray chaos. Emily's pulse thundered in her ears. One engine, raging wind, violent turbulence. Every life on this plane, hers, the passengers, the crew, the unconscious pilots, was in her hands. She gritted her teeth, forcing herself to focus. One control at a time, steady hands, steady mind. The left engine strained, roaring under the extra load. Emily's arms shook violently, her fingers raw from gripping the yoke. Sweat poured down her face, blinding her partially, but she pressed on. Each jolt of turbulence threw her body forward, but she leaned into it, coaxing the plane to respond. "Emily, you're lined up with the runway. Begin final descent. Keep speed steady. Reduce pitch gradually. You can do this," the controller instructed. She nodded, even though he couldn't see her. She pressed forward on the yoke slightly, lowering the plane toward the wet tarmac. The raindrops pelted the windshield, blurring her vision. Lightning cracked close enough to illuminate the entire cockpit, throwing the unconscious pilots into stark relief. Her stomach twisted as she realized the full gravity of the situation. This wasn't a simulator. This wasn't practice. Every microsecond, every adjustment, every ounce of strength mattered. One wrong move, one misjudged gust of wind, and hundreds of lives could end in an instant. The plane groaned under the strain. The left engine coughed violently, threatening to fail. Emily pressed the throttle forward, coaxing it back to life. Sparks of hope flared. She could do this. She had to. Another gust slammed the aircraft, pitching it violently. Oxygen masks swung overhead. Passengers screamed. Children wailed. Flight attendants shouted over the chaos, but their words were swallowed by the storm. Emily blocked it all out, focusing solely on the controls and the runway ahead. Her hands flew over the yoke, adjusting, coaxing, guiding. The plane tilted slightly, and she leaned into the turn, coaxing it back to alignment. Another jolt rocked the fuselage, and she gritted her teeth, fighting against exhaustion and fear. The runway lights grew brighter, clearer, shimmering through the rain. Hope surged, but fear clawed at her again. The wind was relentless, gusting unpredictably, threatening to pitch the plane off course. Emily reduced speed carefully. Maintain alignment, prepare to touch down. One engine only. You can do this, the controller instructed. She nodded, her teeth clenched, sweat blinding her. She eased back on the throttle, reducing speed gradually. The plane trembled under the strain but obeyed. Inch by painstaking inch, the tarmac grew closer. Another gust slammed the plane from the side, pitching it sharply. Emily pressed the yoke forward to maintain descent, coaxing the aircraft back toward the runway. The left engine roared under the pressure, threatening to overheat. She could feel the vibrations through the controls. Her arms burned, her body ached, but she held firm. The cabin behind her erupted. Passengers screamed, clutched children, prayed aloud. Flight attendants braced themselves, shouting instructions over the roar of the storm. Emily ignored it all. She had no time for distraction. The plane tilted again, dangerously close to rolling. She leaned into the controls, coaxing it level. The runway lights now filled her vision, just a few hundred feet above the tarmac. You can do this. You must do this. A violent gust slammed the plane sideways again. Emily fought the yoke with all her strength, coaxing the aircraft to respond. Her vision blurred with sweat. Her arms shook uncontrollably, but she refused to let go. The left engine coughed violently, threatening failure once more. Emily pressed the throttle, coaxing it back to life. Sparks of hope flared. The plane trembled, shuddered, but obeyed her. She could feel the runway beneath her now, wet and gleaming. The plane was lined up almost perfectly, but the storm wasn't done. Wind slammed the fuselage again, violently pitching it downward. The cabin lurched. Oxygen masks swung wildly. Children screamed. Emily gritted her teeth. She pressed forward slightly on the yoke, lowering the nose to touch down. The wheels hit the wet runway with a jarring thud, bouncing slightly. She corrected immediately, coaxing the plane to stay level. Sparks flew as tires scraped the slick tarmac. Rain pelted the windshield. Visibility was near zero. The plane skidded slightly, threatening to veer off course. Emily leaned into the yoke, guiding it back, inch by excruciating inch. The left engine strained violently, but she coaxed it through the final seconds. The plane groaned, tires screeching against the wet tarmac. Another gust slammed the aircraft sideways, but she held firm. Passengers screamed, some in relief, some in terror. The cabin lurched as the plane skidded down the runway. Emily pressed the brakes gently, coaxing the aircraft to slow. The tires screeched. Sparks flew. Finally, the plane slowed to a crawl, aligned perfectly on the runway. Emily's body shook violently with exhaustion. The left engine hummed, alive but strained. The storm raged around them, but for a brief, fleeting moment, they were safe. She exhaled slowly, collapsing against the yoke. The runway lights stretched behind them, the storm still raging beyond the airport perimeter. The passengers were still tense, screaming, crying, hugging one another, but alive. Emily's hands shook violently, sweat poured down her face. Her vision blurred, her arms burned from exertion. And yet somehow she had done it. She had landed the plane. Flight attendants rushed to check on passengers. Some hugged each other, some cried. The hum of engines, the groan of the plane settling, filled the cockpit. Emily slumped against the controls, breathing heavily. The controller's voice came through the radio, calm but reverent. "Emily, you did it. You actually did it. The plane is down. Everyone is safe." Emily blinked, tears streaming down her face. She whispered, barely audible, I did it. Her mind replayed every second, the fear, the chaos, the storm, the cockpit, the screaming passengers, the dying engine, the runaway landing. Every lesson Ben had taught her, every second of courage had carried her through. She looked at the pilots. Captain Harlan stirred faintly. The first officer twitched. Both were still unconscious but alive. The weight of what she had done hit her all at once. She had taken control, saved hundreds of lives, and faced death head-on and survived. The cabin erupted into cheers, some laughter, some sobs. Passengers clung to one another, gratitude and disbelief etched on their faces. Emily remained slumped at the controls, her hands shaking violently. The adrenaline surged through her, body trembling from exhaustion. She whispered again, a fragile, trembling promise to herself. I can do this. I can survive. The storm still raged beyond the airport perimeter, but inside the passengers were safe. The plane was still intact, and Emily Carson, trembling, exhausted, and terrified, had done the impossible. For the first time since the Mayday, a flicker of relief and pride washed over her. She had faced the impossible and won. But even as the storm continued to rage, Emily knew one thing clearly. Nothing would ever be the same. Not for her. Not for anyone on that plane. She had stepped into the cockpit as a terrified girl in seat 9B and emerged a hero. The storm had finally begun to relent. Outside, the rain still fell in sheets, and the wind howled softly through the broken clouds. But inside the plane, a fragile calm settled. Tires skidded to a stop on the wet tarmac, and the hum of the surviving left engine gradually faded. Emily's body sagged against the yoke, trembling violently. Her hands were raw, her arms burned from exhaustion, and tears streamed down her face. Behind her, the cabin was a mixture of chaos and relief. Passengers clung to each other, some still sobbing, some laughing shakily, disbelief etched across their faces. Flight attendants moved through the aisles, assisting and calming the shaken passengers. Children peeked from behind parents' arms, wide-eyed, trying to understand what had just happened. Emily's chest heaved. She had done it. Somehow she had landed the plane. Every lesson, every moment of courage had culminated in this. The weight of what she had accomplished crashed over her, and she felt herself collapse into the cockpit seat, exhausted beyond measure. The cabin crew rushed into the cockpit, expressions of awe and gratitude painted on their faces. "Ma'am, you did it. Everyone's alive," one of them exclaimed, voice breaking. Emily could barely manage a nod, her voice lost in the haze of adrenaline and exhaustion. The controller's voice crackled through the radio once more, calm yet trembling with emotion. "Emily, you've done something incredible. Hundreds of lives saved. I don't even have words. The world will know." Emily whispered, barely audible, I just did what I had to." She pressed her face into her hands for a moment, letting the reality sink in. Hundreds of lives had depended on her, and she had not failed. The thought was both terrifying and exhilarating. She had stepped into seat 9B terrified and uncertain, and emerged as something far beyond what she had ever imagined she could be. Paramedics and airport security began boarding the plane, moving quickly to check on passengers. Emily stayed seated for a moment, watching the scene unfold. The faces of those she had just saved, wide-eyed, teary, and relieved, etched themselves into her memory. Every prayer, every tear, every gasp of relief was a reminder that she had truly made a difference. A small boy no older than 7 approached her cautiously, clutching his mother's hand. He looked up at Emily, eyes wide with awe. You flew the plane?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, voice trembling. I tried my best." The mother hugged the child tightly, tears streaming down her cheeks. "You saved our lives, thank you." Emily's chest tightened. She had never felt gratitude like this. She had never felt fear, adrenaline, and relief intertwining so completely. She took a deep breath and closed her eyes for a moment, letting herself feel the enormity of what she had accomplished. The news crews had already arrived, flooding the tarmac with cameras and microphones. Reporters shouted questions, and flashes of light illuminated the night. Emily, still trembling, was escorted out of the cockpit. She walked down the aisle past passengers, each one offering murmured thanks, applause, or silent nods of recognition. The emotional weight of the moment was almost too much to bear. Outside, the airport lights reflected off the rain-slicked tarmac. Emergency vehicles lined the runway, their lights flashing red and blue. Police, firefighters, and paramedics were everywhere, yet the world seemed to pause as Emily stepped into the open. Reporters swarmed her, shouting questions, cameras rolling. "How did you survive? How did you land the plane? Were you afraid?" Emily looked around, her body shaking, trying to collect herself. Words felt inadequate. All she could say was, I had to try. I had no choice." The media attention escalated quickly. Social media exploded with clips of her in the cockpit, the storm, and the landing. Hashtags began trending worldwide. Seat 9B hero, girl who flew, Emily Carson. Millions were watching, reading, sharing, and marveling at the courage of a young girl who had faced the impossible. Back inside, emergency personnel assisted the passengers off the plane. Emily lingered in the doorway, watching. One elderly man, still shaking, came up to her and grasped her hand. "You gave me my life back. I can't thank you enough." Emily's voice trembled. "You don't need to thank me. I just did what I had to do." Her eyes swept over the passengers, crew, and the dark, stormy sky. Every single person she had saved looked back at her with awe, gratitude, and disbelief. She realized that the act of courage had rippled far beyond the cockpit. Hundreds of lives, families, futures had been spared. She had truly made a difference. The news crews continued to circle, recording every moment. Emily gave a brief statement, her voice calm despite the trembling. "I was terrified. I didn't know if I could do it. But when it mattered, I had to step up. That's all anyone can do when faced with impossible circumstances." Her words spread rapidly, going viral in minutes. People across the country, students, pilots, parents, ordinary citizens, were inspired by her courage. Messages of support, gratitude, and admiration poured in from all over the world. As the adrenaline began to ebb, Emily felt the exhaustion wash over her. Every muscle ached, her arms trembled, and her hands were raw from gripping the yoke. But beneath it all, a deep, overwhelming sense of pride and relief took root. She had faced death, chaos, and the storm, and she had survived. Later, at the press conference held by the airport authorities, Emily sat quietly as officials recounted the details of the landing. She listened, barely processing the technical terms or statistics. She only understood one thing: she had saved lives, hundreds of them. And in that, there was a power, a sense of self she had never known before. When asked what she had felt in the cockpit, she paused, thinking of the screaming passengers, the violent storm, and the failing engines. "Terrified," she admitted honestly. "But I realized fear doesn't stop you from doing what's necessary. Courage isn't the absence of fear, it's acting in spite of it." The room erupted into applause. Cameras flashed. Social media lit up with messages praising her courage. The phrase "girl in seat 9B" became synonymous with heroism, bravery, and the extraordinary capacity of ordinary people to rise to impossible challenges. Later that night, Emily sat quietly in her bedroom, staring at the ceiling. The adrenaline had worn off, leaving exhaustion, relief, and the faint echo of terror. She thought of the passengers, the pilots, the storm, and every microsecond of control she had exerted. Her phone buzzed incessantly with messages. Friends, family, news outlets, strangers, all offering thanks, praise, and disbelief. She smiled faintly. "I did it. I really did it." Her thoughts drifted to Ben, her flight instructor. She imagined him standing beside her, nodding with that familiar, steady gaze. "You did exactly what you were capable of, Emily. You faced fear and you acted." Tears filled her eyes. She had faced the impossible and survived. She had grown in a single night into someone far stronger than she had ever imagined. Emily Carson, the girl who had sat terrified in seat 9B, was now a hero, a symbol, and a living testament to the extraordinary courage that ordinary people could summon in moments of unimaginable pressure. And though the storm outside had passed, the world would remember the storm she had endured inside the cockpit, the one that tested her courage, her determination, and her humanity. Because she had faced it, she had conquered it, and she had saved hundreds of lives in the process.